At the beginning of our era, Eurasia was divided among several giants. In the west was the Roman Empire, stretching from the Atlantic and the British Isles to Syria, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. In the far east was Han China, which controlled territories from the Korean Peninsula to Central Asia. But between these two poles there was an entire world. India, Persia, the steppes of Central Asia, the islands of the Indian Ocean, and the trading cities of Southeast Asia. It is traditionally believed that the Roman Empire was a Mediterranean civilization and its garrisons stopped somewhere along the eastern edge of the Middle East. And everything that lay beyond supposedly existed outside its real reach. Yes, the Silk Road stretched between East and West. Yes, the Romans knew about distant giants. The Romans knew about those lands through stories and goods. But were their contacts really limited to just a chain of intermediaries and overland caravans? And how far east did the Romans actually go? Greetings, friends. You're on the Amazing History Channel. A channel about ancient civilizations, rulers, and all those things that are usually forgotten in school textbooks. Thank you for watching, liking, and sharing your opinions in the comments. Special thanks. A big thank you to the sponsors and patrons without whom it would be much harder for us to make such extensive episodes. Well, today you can expect an interesting episode. Make yourself comfortable and let's get started. Contacts between the East and the West emerged long before the rise of Rome. They developed over centuries. As early as the 7th century BC, the Persian Achaemenid Empire served as a land bridge between worlds. It was through this empire that the Greeks first gained a more or less systematic understanding of distant lands. This mix of knowledge and myths played a key role with the arrival of Alexander the Great. At the end of the 4th century BC, he not only defeated the Persian Empire, but also reached India, expanding the boundaries of the ancient world. His campaign became the first direct military invasion of the depths of Asia by Mediterranean civilization. After his death, the attempt to connect East and West was continued by the Hellenistic states, especially the Seleucids. Diplomatic missions, trade, and cultural exchange took place between the Greek rulers and the Indian kings. When Rome conquered the Mediterranean, it became the heir to this complex system of contacts. A key moment was the annexation of Egypt in 30 BC, a region that had already begun to explore the sea route to India through the Red Sea during the Ptolemaic period. It was through this route that the Indians learned about Rome and sent the first wave of embassies to meet Emperor Augustus. Their exchange was recorded by Cassius Dio, who paints a fascinating picture of the first contact. Soon after that, Rome began to turn its gaze toward the Far East. To understand exactly where they were headed, we need to look at the situation in India itself. In the 3rd century BC, there was a powerful state here, the Maurya Empire. It emerged after the campaigns of Alexander and united most of the subcontinent. Especially under Ashoka, it was a state with a developed administration, infrastructure, a unified monetary system, and an active foreign policy. But after the collapse of the Maurya Empire, India entered a long period of political fragmentation. The north weakened, while the south, by contrast, was on the rise. There, in the lands of the Tamil kingdoms of Chola, Chera, and Pandya, a real maritime boom began. It was southern India that became the gateway through which Rome entered the Eastern world. But, as I already mentioned, the Romans were not opening the route to India from scratch. Greek and Egyptian merchants had been traveling there for a long time, initially through a chain of intermediaries along the coasts of Arabia and Africa. Eventually, Western sailors gradually learned to use the monsoons, seasonal winds that allowed them to cross the Indian Ocean directly. After the annexation of Egypt, Roman merchants also joined this route. And what exactly such a journey looked like, we learn from the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a 1st century AD guide written by a Greek captain. This navigational guide describes in detail the ports, currents, dangers, and even characteristics, which goods are valued in each port, and what dangers await inexperienced sailors. From it, we learn that the route to India was not a romantic adventure, but a well-organized business. The author describes in detail the coast of Arabia, the entrance to the Persian Gulf, the mouths of the Indus, and then the western coast of India. He warns about the strongest tides, which could turn land into sea overnight, about treacherous currents that drag ships into river mouths, and about places where, without the help of local pilots, a ship would almost certainly run aground. The description of the mouth of the Indus, a huge river whose flow was so immense that even far out at sea the water was fresh, sounds especially impressive. For ancient sailors, this was not just a geographical wonder, but a symbol that they had reached the edge of the known world, the very east that Alexander once reached. You shouldn't imagine Roman ships in the Indian Ocean as war galleys with legionaries like in the movies. These were large merchant ships designed to carry hundreds of tons of cargo. They were slow, heavy, but reliable enough to withstand ocean crossings. The voyage took weeks and sometimes even months. Because of the monsoon seasons, merchants often found themselves stranded in India for half a year or longer, waiting for the winds to change. This meant not just trading visits, but a significant presence, setting up warehouses, trading posts, and establishing lasting contacts with local authorities. The main hub of Roman Indian trade on the west coast was the port of Muziris, located in what is now the state of Kerala. It is this port that ancient authors most often mention as the final destination of the sea route from Egypt. The importance of Muziris is evident from the fact that Pliny the Elder called it the nearest Indian market, reachable from the Red Sea in about 40 days with favorable monsoon winds. This means not only geographical proximity, but also regular communication. The port itself was not located directly on the ocean shore, but inland up the river. Large ships anchored in the lagoon, and the cargo was transferred to smaller boats, which delivered it to the city. Such a system reduced the risks of storms and made the port convenient for controlling trade. Indian sources describe Muziris as a noisy, crowded, and extremely wealthy city. In poetry, it appears as a place where sacks of pepper lie next to gold bars, where goods from the mountain regions meet cargoes arriving by sea, and crowds of merchants fill the quays. Foreigners also appear here: Greeks, Persians, Bactrians, and of course Romans. Archaeology confirms this. Huge hoards of Roman gold and silver coins have been found in the region, primarily denarii from the 1st and 2nd centuries. Their number is so great that there is no doubt about the large-scale and long-term presence of the Romans. It is important to note here that the Romans in India were not colonists or conquerors. They had neither an army, nor administration, nor political power. They came as buyers and often paid with real gold. The Romans were primarily interested in high-value goods from India that took up little space. Black pepper, spices, precious and semi-precious stones, pearls, sandalwood, ivory, aromatic oils. Many of these goods were considered luxury items in Rome and were sold at a huge markup. In return, Indian rulers and merchants received Roman coins, wine, glass, metals, and fabrics. But it was gold that was the main attraction. Unlike China, India readily accepted Roman currency, melted it down, and incorporated it into its own systems. Considering all this, let's ask ourselves, how much could a single trading expedition bring in? But let's not speculate, since we have the surviving Muziris papyrus. This is a detailed loan contract for financing the journey of a ship named Germopolon and an assessment of its cargo. It carried great wealth of pepper, ivory, fragrant nard, fabrics, and other goods. The papyrus also lists the expected selling price of these goods. Historians have estimated the total value of the cargo at about 7 million drachmas. That would be enough to buy 2,500 acres of the best farmland in Egypt or pay the annual salary of 9,000 soldiers. Now let's estimate the trade volume, considering that Strabo claims that in the 1st century BC, more than 100 ships sailed to India every year. By very rough calculations, if we multiply the contents of the Hermopolon by 100, we get the annual salary of almost 1 million soldiers. That's twice the size of the Roman army at its peak. And that's even before this golden flow of Indian trade accelerated in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. As a result, we can only imagine how many merchants became rich from this enterprise. What about trade? Merchants weren't the only ones drawn to India. Along with them came diplomats, philosophers, and religious figures. Christian tradition claims that the Apostle Thomas carried out several missions across India at the end of the 1st century AD, where he founded churches and converted people. At that time, he apparently was attacked and eventually killed in 72 AD. Such dangers were not uncommon. Western sources often mentioned piracy and destabilization from wars, which forced foreign merchants to look for safer harbors elsewhere. When Roman merchants settled on the west coast of India, the boundary of the known world began to shift even further. The next step was the island that ancient authors called Taprobana, which is modern-day Sri Lanka. For the Romans, this was not just another trading post, but a symbolic frontier, a place beyond which it seemed another world began, with different skies and a different reality, with laws of nature and almost mythical ideas about space. Ancient authors regularly used Taprobane as a metaphor for extreme remoteness. The poet Ovid, complaining about his exile, wrote that the only place farther to send someone would be Taprobane or beyond the stars. In other words, there was nowhere farther to go. According to Pliny the Elder, the first contact with Taprobane happened by accident. Around the year 40 AD, during the reign of Emperor Claudius, the ship of a Roman merchant, a freedman named Annius Placum, was carried far to the south by a storm. After 2 weeks in the open sea, the ship was cast ashore on the island. The merchant was received by the local ruler and kept at the court for about 6 months. During this time, Placam learned the language and spoke about Rome, its laws, the power of the emperor, and the scale of the state. Judging by the description, the impression was so strong that the king decided to send his own embassy to Rome. Soon, 4 ambassadors from Taprobane arrived in Italy, who were received at the court of Claudius. Thus, Sri Lanka first entered the Roman worldview as a real place with people, cities, and a political system. Pliny recounts their stories in detail. According to him, the island was vast and fertile. In the center, there was a large lake from which 2 major rivers flowed. The population numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and the capital city was very populous. Romans were especially interested in the organization of society. According to the ambassadors, there was no slavery on the island, and the ruler was chosen by the people for his gentle character and sense of justice. Moreover, if the king had a son, he had to give up power to avoid turning the rule into a hereditary tyranny. Even the death penalty, according to these stories, was applied in an unusual way. The condemned person was not executed, but exiled forever. For the Romans, who were used to completely different customs, all of this seemed exotic and almost utopian. But despite the philosophical discussions, the main interest remained quite earthly, the wealth of the island. Sri Lanka was famous for its gold, silver, precious stones, and especially the huge shells of sea turtles, which were used as roofing material. It's no surprise that soon after the first contacts, trade between the Romans and Taprobane intensified. Moreover, in the 3rd century AD, there were even prophecies circulating that one day a Roman emperor would appoint his own governor on the island. This is an indication of how close and attainable it had become in the imagination of the Romans. But even Sri Lanka was not the final destination. Along with Indian and local merchants, Roman goods continued to move further into the southern seas, to where Southeast Asia began. It is here that we come to the most difficult part. But did the Romans go even further to the lands we now call Vietnam, Cambodia, and China? When it comes to Roman presence beyond India, the solid ground of facts gradually starts to slip away. Here, there are no detailed descriptions of ports like there are in India. There are no direct Roman accounts of a long-term presence. Instead, we only have scattered finds, foreign chronicles, and hints that leave us with doubts. The first thing that stands out is archaeology. Roman coins and goods are found far to the east of India. In Burma, Sumatra, Java, and even in Vietnam. Sometimes these are individual finds, sometimes hoards. At first glance, it may seem that the Romans reached here as well. But coins by themselves don't prove anything. They could have gotten here by dozens of different routes. Through Indian merchants, local trade networks, or as prestigious items that were passed from hand to hand, gradually moving farther from their place of origin. Modern historians agree that in the 1st centuries AD, there was already a powerful and independent trading world in Southeast Asia. Its main driving force was not the Romans, but the Indian maritime powers. It was they who controlled most of the trade in the Bay of Bengal and the southern seas. Indian merchants established trading posts, spread religious language, ideas, and forms of government. This is how early Indian-influenced states appeared in the region. Against this background, the Romans, if they were present at all, played the role of rare and not always noticeable participants. Nevertheless, they cannot be completely written off either. Chinese sources from the Han dynasty mention a country called Da Qin, which means Great Qin. Under this name, most researchers confidently recognize the Roman Empire. These chronicles say that merchants from Da Qin appeared in the lands of modern Vietnam and Cambodia, and sometimes traveled even further. They are described as maritime traders, not ambassadors or military leaders, which is telling in itself. A particularly intriguing report dates back to the year 166 AD. According to Chinese chronicles, an embassy from Da Qin arrived at the court of Emperor Huangdi, coming by sea from the south. Formally, it represented the Roman emperor, who at that time was Mark. The problem is that Roman sources do not mention this embassy at all. Therefore, many researchers suggest that this was not a state mission, but rather a group of merchants who pretended to be envoys, which was quite a common practice in the ancient world. Nevertheless, the very fact that such people appeared in China says a lot. Even if they were not official emissaries, but enterprising merchants, they still traveled a route that connected the two ends of Eurasia. The geography of ancient maps also complements this picture. In the 2nd century AD, Ptolemy depicted a large bay called Magnus Sinus on his map, which most historians identify with the area of the Gulf of Siam. Whether any Romans actually made it there personally remains an open question. But the very fact that these lands were included in the worldview of the Mediterranean shows a constant influx of information, even if it was indirect. Thus, the farther east you go, the less distinct the Roman presence becomes. If in India it was regular trade and long-term stays, in Sri Lanka there were rare but documented contacts, while in Southeast Asia and China there were more traces, shadows and reflections than a clear presence. Even in this form, they show the main point. The ancient world was much more interconnected than is commonly believed. Rome never conquered the East by military force, but its goods, money and people still managed to reach almost to the edge of the known world at that time. Well, that's all from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye, everyone.